Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Woo Curious podcast. Your map to the mystical, your key to the sacred, and your guide back home to yourself. I'm Eileen, a writer, a spiritual coach, energy healer, and slow living witch. This podcast is your invitation to explore a world where the mundane and the sacred intertwine. It's a haven for those ready to take the first steps into the realms of magic and mystery, providing a safe space for you to embark on your own enchanted journey towards healing and self-discovery. Here, I'll unveil the whispers of the mystical, the rituals often hidden in plain sight, and I'll engage in sacred conversation intended to stir your soul and lead you back into your power. I'm all about demystifying woo and witchcraft. So, whether you're a seasoned seeker or simply woo curious, I'm so delighted you've decided to join me on this journey. Let's make magic. Hey Woo Crew, before we drop into today's episode, I wanted to make sure that you didn't miss out on getting signed up for Shine. This is my free 4-day guided journey to help you step into your authenticity and shine. It is running live Monday through Thursday beginning June 17th at noon Mountain Standard Time. Each day will be about 45 minutes and there will be prizes, and of course each day will be recorded. You can still win prizes even if you can't attend live, because it's important to me that everyone has equal access. I am so excited about this. When I ran Bloom back in the spring, it was so well received that I just couldn't wait to run another one. So don't miss out. Sign up today. Even if we've begun, you can catch the replays. The link is below. I hope to see your shining faces there. Hello, and welcome back, Woo Crew, to another episode of the Woo Curious podcast. I am so delighted today to be joined in the studio by Melissa Armstrong. Melissa is a coach. She is a catalyst for finding meaning in the mess and the magic in the everyday. An emotional alchemist and a lifelong truth seeker, Melissa guides people to transmit confident and magnetic presence, expanding their capacity to transform their inner and outer worlds and lead in every facet of their lives. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Melissa. Welcome to the Woo Curious podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here with you, to chat with you today.
Yeah, me too. I feel like your message and what you do with people is really resonant. It feels like we are kindred spirits walking parallel paths in a way.
I feel the same way. I feel we definitely have a strong resonance. So I'm so glad the universe brought us together.
Yeah, me too. This podcast has been delightful in bringing people into conversations with me that I would never have met otherwise. And I'm just feeling really, really lucky to have that.
Yes, it's awesome. I really enjoy the podcast so much.
Yay. So as you are familiar with, if you're a listener to the podcast, I usually like to start these conversations out by asking a little bit about your spiritual journey, your woo journey. This is going to be the theme of today. We're going to talk about following that spiritual thread. But I'm always so curious if you have been into the woo, shall we say, throughout your life, or if it's something that came later, and what led you to this career that you're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I came into this life as a seeker or with the woo embedded in me somehow, because I remember even as a little child sort of feeling this strong sense of knowing there's something about the mystery of this life. When I was a little girl, I was raised going to church, so I sort of had like a Christian spiritual framework. My family went to church every Sunday, but I don't feel that, I feel that I had the seeking and the sense of being in contact with the universe or the mystery or God or whatever we want to call it. I feel like that was just always with me. It sort of was never a question. I mean, over the years, I've definitely doubted and questioned it all, but it kind of just came from the beginning. And throughout my life, I sort of had ups and downs, I guess, as we all have. That's a pretty general way of explaining life, right? But I had a strong sense of the spiritual till my late teens. Then I kind of gave it all up. That kind of coincided with a period of about 15 years of addiction. I kind of went into an addiction for many years. And I would say that I was not in contact with my woo at that time.
Right.
But I look back and see that my addiction was kind of like a way of me trying to transcend the world and escape myself. So there's like interesting parallels there with the spiritual life.
Yeah.
And then I've been sober for the past 10 years. And so getting into sobriety has really opened me back up to that thing that I was missing, which is the woo, which is contacting like my inner essence, that essence that we all have. So maybe I'll pause there because I could probably go off.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, oh, I have so many questions because I'm always so curious about people's journeys. But I love how you've made that connection already between, addiction being one way of trying to access something else. And often it's a place that we fall into when something about life is painful and we're trying to heal the pain, but in a almost, I want to say, like this embodied kind of misguided way where we're trying to escape from that sensation. We just don't want to feel something. And there are different paths that we can take, and substances are a really quick, easy way to access a dissociation from like the muck that we find ourselves in on this physical plane.
Totally. I mean, from one standpoint, addictions really make sense, right? Because we're just trying to escape something or avoid feeling something, turn away from the pain. So it's like, yeah, the body's just trying to regulate somehow or cope. It's just like you say, addictions just have negative consequences also. But I think it's a compassionate way of looking at it, rather there's a lot of stigma and blaming still in our culture around addiction when it's like, actually, like, why the addiction? And if we look at that, it's like, we're just trying to cope in this world. It's just, it can turn very bad. It can turn into a bad way of coping.
Yeah, I think I love, the work of Gabor Mate, for instance, on this, his most recent book, The Myth of Normal. And I loved reading it because in a lot of ways it was like I had this resonance of thank you to somebody for finally saying what I have been thinking for a while now, since stepping into the path of energy healing. I trained under a woman who created a year-long immersion for wild medicine energy training. And the overall principles that she presents right at the beginning and touches back to over and over is this divine feminine principles of harmlessness and compassion. And so it really is this compassionate curiosity. I truly believe and have for a long time that nobody is like a bad person. People do bad things, but it's always this product of injury and harm, and it sometimes generationally. So it's so fascinating and wonderful that the world is slowly tipping towards recognizing that in people. And I think removing that stigma and giving that compassion allows for people to then reach out for the support to maybe make the transition to pursue sobriety. Is that something that you would agree with, or is that, thoughts?
Yeah, totally. I love what you're saying. And I think like fundamentally just allowing ourselves to be where we are, accepting where we are, even if we find ourselves in a really tricky place or with bad habits. If we are in that place and we meet someone who has any semblance of compassion, we're much more likely to open up and be able to share where we're coming from. And I love what you're saying about energy work and the principles of the divine feminine. And when I think about Gabor Mate, he's so awesome, and he's so helpful at this time in our culture. But I think many of us grew up without kind of coping mechanisms or like the welcoming of talking about our feelings. So a lot of the emotional self kind of gets suppressed for us, right? So I remember hearing somebody say we don't bury our emotions dead, we bury them alive. And I was like, oh, that's so good. Because it's like it's all in the body, right? It's also those emotions, the energy is stuffed down in addictions. And I think really wants to be freed up. Nobody really wants to live that way. It's just maybe the way things unfold, the best way to cope.
Yeah, and they don't have the tools to process the big things, the traumas, the, big T and little t traumas and emotional states that are uncomfortable. Like you pointed that out. We, as a generation, anybody kind of who's over the age of probably 25, I think it's getting better. I do think it's getting better, but we weren't given the tools to sit with and be okay with those bigger negative emotions that come up, and they are uncomfortable. I think my own experience of starting to confront those emotions and be like, okay, I'm gonna feel them, was this immense surprise at how quickly they passed if I actually fully presenced myself to them and allowed them to be there.
Yes, it's just getting to that can be so scary. We can do so much to avoid. If no one ever talked to us about how to do it, right? We can do so much to avoid it. When it's true, if we can face them, sit with them, they do tend to naturally move through. But I think for many folks, it's like, it's so funny how emotions seem to be so frightening. And we're not necessarily going like, I'm afraid of my emotions. It's just that they're so stuffed down, right? I just observe that in the culture and in so many folks and I totally used to be this way, that it was just scary and I'll just avoid. But I totally agree with you. It's totally possible for anyone to learn how to sit with it all and allow it to move.
Yeah, and that's where having a coach, a mentor, somebody who knows how to presence those emotions, who's okay with holding space for them, to help guide you into them for the first few times in a supported and super safe space, because they do feel like they're gonna like sweep you away. But
Totally.
they truly, I remember when I learned in my coaching course that an emotion physiologically cannot last more than 90 seconds in your body. That really strong feeling. And I was like, oh, that's like labor contractions at transition, because I was a midwife before I was a coach. And this sense of, okay, well, I can do anything for 90 seconds. And so that knowledge that even if it is super strong and overwhelming, it will subside. That peak physiologic emotional response just cannot physically live in your body for longer than that.
Yeah, it's so weird that that's so true. 90 seconds, like it's not a long time. But I think what we know happens is we get involved in the story of it all, and then they can last much longer than 90 seconds. But if we learn these skills, we can train ourselves to process, right?
Yeah,
And
it's like
feel
we get
more
into
free.
that belief, right? Yeah, the belief system, the story that repeats, makes us think that the emotion is drawn out, but the actual physiological event has passed, and then we can obviously go back into it, just like a labor contraction can start again after a pause. But it's a really fascinating area of exploration or inquiry.
It is.
Yeah. I want to take us to this idea of following that spiritual thread through our lives. I love the way that you described feeling like you entered the world as a seeker and having this connection. And I'm curious you said that you always had a strong sense of knowing. And because not everybody has felt that tapped into this piece of themselves, I'd love if you are able, you may not be able to, but if you're able to describe, what does that sense of knowing feel like? How did you know you had that knowing? What was the sense?
Yeah, such a good question. It is a feeling, a strong sense for me that is experiential, like it's not conceptual. I didn't decide, I didn't choose, oh, I'm going to have a faith or believe in the divine. It wasn't like the idea, like I picked up the idea on the street and then, just came to believe in it. It was like a strong felt sense, like an intuitive knowing in the body. And so when I would check for it as a little girl, not that I was overtly doing that, but it was like it was always in contact with me and I was in contact with it. And that does sound super woo, doesn't it? I can explain it as feeling experiential just in the body. I just always had like a yes to that mystery. And it wasn't like I had a clear image for it, but it was like it's just something that's present in me and present in the world. And, I feel it now. And I've definitely asked myself over the last few years, and I don't have an answer to this, but I've been like, why is it that I feel this so strongly and powerfully as a knowing? And not everyone seems to be as interested, or when it seems to be the thread that I'm following in my life. Like, in a way, I want to say it drives me, but I'm not sure if it drives me so much as it's something that's unfolding and that I'm following. And it feels important. And I think it feels really good to feel myself as part of a mystery. When I look around at the world, there's a lot we can explain and see rationally, but this is deeper than that. Yeah, so maybe I'll pause there.
Yeah, I love that connection sense. My brain goes in like 18,000 directions when I listen to people talk, and I'm like, which thread do I want to pick up on? But that sense of connection, and you didn't say the word connection, but that's kind of what I kept picking up on. This sense of not being alone on the journey almost is kind of coming through, right? Connection to something greater, connection to something deeper. I get this sense because on this podcast, I talk to mostly people who are in helping professions. And I think this is a commonality among those of us who are walking the path of healers, of coaches, of, those of us who are supporting others on their journey, is that we came into this physical being this time with this purpose. And so it makes sense that there is a bit of a stronger connection for us to that sense of there's something more, and I'm following a path and a thread, and maybe I'm meant to help those people who came and were not so connected to find that connection or to create that meaning, or, here is a path. I think there are many, but being able to be almost like a bit of a path maker. And I think about, walking through snow and how the person who goes first, it's like waiting. But if you've got the thread, you're going in the right direction. And then the people who resonate with your specific energy and direction have an easier path behind you to follow.
Yeah, that's so sweet. I love that. And I say yes, like I resonate with what you're saying deeply. And this knowing that we're talking about, it seems to me, is something we can all access, which is, I think, what you're saying as well. And some of us just seem to have been more connected or feel a deeper connection now. And I feel like that sense of knowing is super nurturing and sweet, and it's like our inherent nature. So I think that it's something that's really worthy of trying to discover, because the world can feel fraught and messy and highly conflictual a lot of the time. And this knowing and this path has really helped me cope in the world in a much sort of sweeter, healthier way. And I like to be able to share this presence and awareness with other people if they're interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that space of, I really do get the sense that there is this shift despite the extra polarized political landscape that we're living in right now. There is also this kind of tide or underground current that's rising, it feels like, of this more feminine, compassionate energy. The remembering of that divine feminine way of moving in the world. And something else that you, as you were speaking, that came to mind was almost the sense of most of us probably came onto this earth with that connection. When we think back before we became influenced and impacted by all of those things that can impact us, some of us from a very, very young age, and some of us once we got a little bit older, most of us came in with that connection. And I think it's a very common theme that we lose the connection at some point, as you describe on your journey. I certainly had this chunk of my life where I was an atheist. That's what I proclaimed myself to be. There was always this little nagging voice that was like, are you really? Like, do you really not believe in anything? But certainly, outwardly, consciously, I am an atheist. We return to dirt. And that is it, like, end of story. Nothing else, only science, only what we can observe. And then coming back and finding this thread that was always there. And so I think part of that journey for those of us who pick the thread back up is helping others pick their thread back up. And they may have lost that thread in utero, potentially, depending on what external forces were going on. But yeah, it strikes me that we all have it, as you said, and we can all find it again. And sometimes I think all of us need a helping hand to pick it back up, a nudge, something to make us feel safe enough to open to it again.
Yes. And what comes up for me is last week I was on a meditation retreat, and one of the things that was coming up while I was sitting a lot was, I can't do everything alone. And then I was like, I don't think I can do anything alone. Like, can we really do anything alone? And maybe that sounds like, oh, this was just this silly thing that was coming up while I was sitting on my meditation cushion. But we are so interconnected. But if we feel a sense of breaks in our relationships, if we've struggled with our relationships, with our emotions, with our spiritual side, it can be safer to kind of stay an outsider, stay kind of at a distance from other people. I don't think we're meant to live that way. And I don't know that there's all that much we can do alone, Maybe that sounds silly and not at all profound, but the mystery, I think, is inviting us to be in relationship, to heal our relationships. And a spiritual teacher once told me that if we do this work on ourselves and kind of reconnect to our inner essence, we can heal the future and the past. It's like we can kind of heal and take care of this energy across time. And I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah. I think that what you were saying is profound in a way. And for some, it might be like, yeah, obviously. But sometimes the most profound statements are obvious to some of us. And for others, this might be landing like a, whoa. Because again, it's juxtaposed with this culture that we're in, which really prizes hyper-independence, which I've spoken to before. Maybe I haven't on the podcast. I've written about a lot how that hyper-independence it's a trauma response in a lot of ways. It's born from being shown that the only person you can trust is yourself. But we're not individuals in the sense of being like islands unto ourselves. We are always in connection, whether it be with other humans or the more than human world, source, guides, all of that. And you also touch there on this idea that, time isn't linear. In a lot of the great traditions, time is very much cyclical. I would hazard that it was cyclical in even the Western traditions before old white guys got a hold of it.
Yeah.
And decided to use it to control and to take power. And this idea of, yes, being able to help heal for our ancestors and for our future descendants who are also in a way our ancestors. It's just this big beautiful loop.
Yes, and I totally agree. And I think that this is, for me, one of the benefits of having a meditation practice, because when we can really learn to sit with ourselves, sit with whatever's coming up, the more we do that and kind of train those meditative skills, the more we relax and the more we touch into the mystery, and we can even have experiences of that quality of timelessness that you're talking about. So all of this can be experienced directly, right? And it can be tricky to put words to, although it's also really fun to talk about, right? But it's like, that's what's so cool, is that anyone can touch into this experience through meditation or other practices, going deeper. And another thing you mentioned that really lights up for me about the kind of the generational impacts that kind of land in our laps is that this is something else I've been kind of sitting with, and other people have said this way better than I can. But if we think about pain and, suffering and trauma coming down through our ancestors, which for many of us would be the case, it's not personal either. And that's kind of freeing to be like, I could do the work on healing it, but some of what has happened is totally not personal to me. And I think that's really relaxing and freeing to touch into.
Yeah, it takes away some of that burden of, not that you're not responsible for it. If it's playing out in your life, there is some sense of a bit of responsibility there. You can choose to pick it up or choose not to. But that depersonalization of it, with so many things, if you don't tie yourself to something as part of your identity, it's easier to change it. I'm thinking about, beliefs right now. I have believed and said some things in my life, as we all have, that I later look back and go, ooh, nope, was off the mark there. And if I've tied my sense of self or who I am to that belief, it becomes really, really hard to show up and say, I was wrong and I changed my mind. And I think that's, one of the beautiful pieces of starting to do the work of healing, of connecting into these bigger connections. I used the same word twice there, but it's this being able to depersonalize what you're bringing with you from past lives. It's not about you. It was about them. You get to have the great privilege and honor of perhaps releasing it or helping to heal it for the future. And then in your own life too, having that ability to distance yourself from your beliefs in a little way so that you can change them more freely, so that it's not like this huge identity crisis when you decide you're not an atheist anymore. You're actually a very woo energy healer, for instance.
I love that transition. Yes. I really agree. And over the last 5 years or so, I have been sitting with a Zen teacher. So I have a Zen Buddhist practice. And my Zen practice has really helped me to, it's a work in progress, and I think will be for my whole life, but has helped me to relax the places where I get stuck in my identity or in who I think I really am, the things that I really hold on to tightly that I feel represent me. And a lot of that is through studying with a Zen teacher. A lot of it is through doing a lot of sitting meditation. We start to see these old patterns coming up again and again and again, and then how we over-identify with them and make them us. So my Zen practice has really helped me as well to just try to drop some of my old stuff, see where I'm stuck now. And that helps me be more flexible and adaptable and willing to be open to changing.
Yeah, I love that you brought us back around to meditation, because I have this really vivid memory of the first time I was sitting in meditation where I suddenly was like observing myself meditate. That ability to observe your own thoughts is such a cool experience, because it was really that first time where I had that sense of, oh yeah, it is all connected. We are all connected. We are like, there are many and there is one. And this sense of being able to kind of zoom out and observe myself almost from at a distance. I'm quite clairvoyant, so I get lots of visuals when I'm having experiences like this, when I'm doing healing work. And it was like I was just watching myself in my little chair and watching these thoughts bob by. And I'd love to know, when did you start your meditation practice? Like, how did that find you?
Yes. Well, so just over 10 years ago, I got sober. Like I entered my recovery journey. And so in that moment, it was more than a moment, but in the early phase of recovery, kind of the first few months, I was like, okay, I need some help because I had quit drinking entirely, no more drugs. And then it's like, wait, now I have to face reality, which is all the feelings bubbling up inside me. I started to notice I'm not very good at dealing with stress. I have a lot of anxiety. And it's like, oh, maybe that's what I've been drinking over, So it just became really clear to me and obvious I should start meditating. That's something sober people do. That's what I hear sober people do, meditate. And I was really, really lucky in that I learned meditation from a really wise teacher, a guy by the name of Jeff Warren in Toronto. He has a group called the Consciousness.
App.
Yes, Jeff Warren is in the Calm app. Jeff is amazing. He's so great.
Sorry.
Yes.
Carry on.
Yes. He's so great. He has made a huge impact on the world. Like Jeff is a person who taught me to meditate. He has a group called the Consciousness Explorers Club in Toronto. And he taught me like basic techniques that come from a system called unified mindfulness that I could do on my own. And like there's many ways to meditate, but I was really struggling in early sobriety because I was like a little cloud of overwhelm. I was just like, blah, all the time. And so just if I had been given the instruction, just sit, I wouldn't have been able to because I felt this overwhelm and I didn't want to sit still. But I learned how to focus on the body, notice the mind. I learned techniques that made sense and really started to have an impact right away. And that sense of overwhelm was really greatly reduced. And I started to it was like I was identified with being overwhelmed. I was identified as being like a hardcore anxious person. But meditation started to make a lot of space around that. And it wasn't that I didn't continue to feel anxiety, but I had a way to work with it. It started to just really calm me down. And then I started to really be able to touch into deep beyond that anxiety, that quiet stillness, that inner knowing. So I have become like a real, I want to say like fanatic of meditation, but is that the most positive way of saying it? But it's something that changed my life. I really believe in it. We can take all kinds of approaches to it. We can take a secular approach. We are learning skills when we do it. And it's really something that's been fundamental for me. But it was my recovery journey that got me started.
Right. Yeah. I love that Jeff Warren is the person that you learn from, because when I talk to people about starting up a meditation habit, there's often a lot of resistance. And a common theme is I'm no good at meditating. I can't stop my brain. It's like the purpose or the idea is not to actually stop your thoughts, but to become aware of them. But I often will refer people to the Calm app. I ended up with a lifetime membership of it shortly before they went to a year-to-year model. I had this option to buy a lifetime membership, and I was using it for the sleep stories. So now I have like unlimited 30-day trials. I hand them out like candy. And usually what I'll recommend is that people go in and do Jeff Warren's 30 days like intro, because he has so many different techniques to try out.
Yes.
And I actually, that moment that I described, the first time I ever really felt like I was observing myself, was in one of his guided meditations. So I love that thread is there.
That is such a great connection. I mean, it's not an exaggeration for me to say he changed my life. Like, I'm going to
Yeah.
start crying. When you look and you're like, there've been certain people who just really were catalysts on your path, and he was one of them for me. So I love
Hmm.
that we have that in common. And he's like a
Yeah.
real person. He just talks
Yeah.
about what's going on in his life, which people
Hmm.
really relate with, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what makes his work so powerful is that he talks about his own his shit, the stuff that comes up, the very human trials, and it's so obvious that he's not a perfect human, and he's doing it anyways, doing the work and getting better and forgiving himself and learning how to do that. It's a very relatable story for sure.
Totally. And I think I've been meditating for many years now, 10 years, in fact. And I mean, all kinds of stuff comes up. Life just keeps serving
Hmm.
stuff to me, but meditation helps me cope with it. I don't need to pick up a drink because I'm so overwhelmed. And a
Hmm.
lot of what has helped me cope has been meditative skills.
Yeah, yeah, I love that tying back in again. Life isn't, there's no place to arrive at. I think so often in the coaching communities, healing communities, these spiritual spaces, it's really easy to get into this space of spiritual bypassing, or
Hmm.
of like you see these leaders, I'm going to say quotes, who are playing out or showing this like perfect life where everything is happy and high vibe at all times. And I think there's something so compelling when those people who really are living a life that is, full of meaning and purpose and joy, when they're also able to show up and say, and shitty things still happen. Life is still life. Having those practices, having the ability to come back to those spaces of acceptance and being able to sit with the whole variety of emotion gives capacity to navigate those ups and downs, but it's not like the downs ever go away.
It's so true. It's so true. But being on this path just helps us be more present with everything, just be present with what is here. And that's something I've really learned from my Zen practice. It's just be with whatever is showing up for you. And sometimes it's like, I'm crying again. And I'm a huge fan of crying, and I encourage others to cry. But sometimes I'm like, woo, I'm going through it again. But resisting it and trying to push it away makes it worse.
Yeah.
So it's just allowing, embracing, and seeing everything as potentially being a lesson or something that can teach me rather than something I need to fight with. That's just what makes it a
Mm-hmm.
practice, though. It's always a work in progress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned resistance because that's what I just wrote down. That again, when it comes to emotions or things that are happening that we wish weren't there, we create more discomfort for ourselves when we resist. When we not on top of the like, I feel like crap, I don't want to feel like crap. And it's like adding this secondary not great feeling emotion onto the primary not great feeling emotion, and we like magnify these states for ourselves. And so it's lovely to have that tool of something like meditation to be able to give the space needed to be with and allow and keep you in your nervous system feeling safe through it as
Mm.
well. I think that's probably part of the potency of meditation is that nervous system soothing that long time practice
Yeah.
allows you to tap into.
Yes, totally. Totally. That's what's so great is we learn how to give the body that kind of nurturing, nourishing state.
Mm-hmm.
And then it becomes more available the more we do it, the more we
Yeah.
practice. Yeah.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I imagine that when you are, working with clients, this is something that you really encourage them to start to integrate into their lives.
Yes,
That's a question.
absolutely. And yes, and finding ways that will work for each person. I've taught mindfulness to many different groups over the years, and I use it in my one-on-one practice. And, you mentioned one of the common things that come up when I can't turn off my mind, or there's many kind of common things that people will raise about why we can't meditate. There just seems to be these barriers that we kind of have and we bring to the practice. But there's so many different ways of practicing. It's just about finding a way, a technique that you'll enjoy doing, because then you're more likely to repeat it. And then you can build those skills in yourself, the ability to focus and create calm.
I think that's part of what I love so much about one-on-one support. I know that you offer one-on-one coaching. I have a one-on-one container. I feel like these days all I see is like group masterminds and like lots of group offerings, which are great because they can serve more people. And there's something so magical about being able to tailor an experience to an individual. And so I love that you offer one-on-one longer containers too, because this kind of stuff doesn't happen overnight, right?
That's it. I think in a single session, you might gain insight, feel good, but a lot of these pieces of work just take time, focus, working on new habits and patterns, unpacking what comes up along the way. So to make those shifts, to really profoundly shift, we do need to take time and focus on ourselves.
It's so true that, if we've been doing, I was talking about this recently just on Instagram or TikTok or somewhere, I don't know, about how beliefs and thought patterns, if we've had these beliefs or thought patterns for our whole lives, they've really worn these, like, you can think about it as like ruts in a road, and a dirt road, and how, the wheels groove those ruts deeper and deeper, and so it's harder and harder to get out. And then if you do make that effort to get out, which can happen in one session, it feels so great, but you're still just kind of like driving along the very edge of those ruts, and it's so easy to like bloop, fall back in, which is where our brains want to be, because it is less effortful for our brains, therefore freeing up mental processing for threats. Because again, our brains are always trying to keep us alive. So having someone like you, a coach or mentor, to help keep nudging us out of those ruts is so important.
Yes, and like, what's the habit that helps us stay out of the rut? I love that metaphor. I have like a strong visual of it. And yeah, like what you said, it's like, thank you, brain. You're just trying to keep me alive, So even if we have these tricky coping mechanisms or old beliefs that maybe don't really work so well for us, they served a purpose at one time.
Yeah.
And so not shaming and blaming ourselves, I think, is so important. I really try to impart that to my coaching clients. And then, like, what will help you shift? What are the shifts you need? What can we build into your life together now? And having somebody to be with you on that journey, and who's maybe done some work, who has some training, and who can just offer you that space is huge, because brains are funny in that even if we can kind of see conceptually, this old thing I've been doing isn't really working for me anymore, without a bunch of repetition of the new thing, we will just keep falling back into the old thing. And in a way, it's like, we just keep choosing that because it's easier, even if it is pain. It's it's a weird paradox, but does seem to be true.
Yeah, it is that. I mean, it's that known hell is, to your brain, a lot safer than the unknown potential heaven, right? It's that, I mean, we come down to the neuroscience of it all, and it's about myelination. I can get really nerdy and geeky about it, and that it is like, it requires fewer calories for your brain to send a nerve impulse down a path that has been used over and over because of this thing called the myelin sheath that allows the impulses to move faster and more easily. So it really is easier, even if the result is not a place that you want to be. And so, yeah, I would love for you to share a little bit about what walking with you for the containers, the journey that you take people on, looks like. I think you said you have 3 and 6 month journeys.
Yeah.
I'm using the word journey because I love it. I don't think it's your word.
It's a good word. Yeah. So I offer coaching packages or coaching container that's a 3-month package or a 6-month package. And sort of overarchingly, what I'm doing in my one-on-one coaching is helping folks to transmit a more confident energy in the world. And so below that, I'm helping folks mainly in the areas of what I call the emotional texture of our lives and where we're caught in our emotions, where we're stuck in our thinking. So, helping to change the channel on our thinking, helping to shift bad habits to healthier habits. So, I tend to work with folks who are quite sensitive, vulnerable, maybe have had bad habits in the past, or just seeing where they're kind of stuck emotionally in their thinking and they want to make new shifts so that they feel brighter and they're transmitting more of the self they want to transmit in the world.
That sounds lovely. And where can people find you if they're wanting to reach out and connect for some support?
Yes, so my website is strongarm.ca. So my name is Melissa Armstrong and my website is strongarm.ca, and you can find my socials, my Instagram, connect with me in my newsletter. I'm a writer, so I put out a contemplative kind of magical newsletter. And so all that's on my website, strongarm.ca.
I love that. And that link will be below along with your Instagram handle as well, so that it's easy for people who are listening here to connect with you. I feel like we could probably talk for like 2 more hours.
Yes.
But perhaps in the future we'll reconvene. But thank you so much for being my guest today. I really think that there was a lot of wonderfully supportive discussion for all the listeners on this episode with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you, Woo Crew, for listening. That is all for today. As I mentioned, all the links to get in touch with Melissa will be below in the show notes. As always, if you liked this episode, please go ahead and leave a rating and review. It really helps for this podcast getting discovered by more wonderful listeners like you. And share to your socials. Tag us both if you like this episode. We would really appreciate it. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next week.